thank you very much, Asla, for this kind introduction of my person and of my talk. And just a question: do you hear me? And can you see my screen? Can you see the slide now?
Yes, at this I see it. Everything,
okay.
Everybody seems to.
Okay, thank you very much. So,
yes.
so let me thank you all, and especially Mehriban and Güneş for the kind invitation in this to give a talk in this fantastic lecture series they have established a while ago already. And I have enjoyed this series so far very, very much, and I also learned a lot. And overall, I think you, Mehriban and Güneş, you offer all of us the opportunity to be connected in these crazy times, in this mad world, and at least virtually, we stay in contact with each other. And I would also like to express my thanks that that I can give a talk here, because I feel very honored to dedicate my talk to Offer Bar Yosef. He was one of the greatest, and I will always remember him as a very inspiring and very kind person. And I met him at the ICANE conference 2016 in Vienna, and I found our chats and talks very, very inspiring. So let me talk about the pioneers, seafarers, and farmers at Neolithic Çukuriçi Höyük. Let me start first with an overview of the site and its landscape and its embedding in the environmental context, to present you at least a quick rush run by presenting some of our geoarchaeological investigations there. Then I will continue to talk a bit about the pioneers of the funding horizon, dating to the early or initial Neolithic in Western Anatolia. Then I will talk a bit more about the late Neolithic communities in this continuous history of the site, with by showing you some of our more recent results from our stratigraphical analysis. Then I will again just give you a rough overview of the subsistence strategies that will show you that we are talking about Neolithic communities with a full Neolithic established economy from the beginning of the site. And then at the end, I will give you some insights on the resources and networks based on various scientific data by many of the experts who conducted these analyses in the past and are still working on the project. Well, we started there as a kind of a rescue investigation to clarify the potential of this tell before it seems to be, or it seemed to be, erased by modern day farming, industrial farming destruction. I have started there in 2006 with a test trench as a kind of a one-woman expedition. Me and one of the local workers started this test trench, and then a year later I came back with a small team in 2007, and from 2007 onwards we excavated there in 7 long excavation seasons. But as Asla already mentioned, without finishing many of the recovered areas, which makes some of the final interpretations somehow difficult or even impossible. And I will show you some of these unsolved stratigraphical questions a bit later. Well, a lot of the main data of the site are already published, yeah, and we are still working on some details and detailed aspects of the outcome, including also the complex stratigraphy of the Neolithic layers, and we also work on the integration of these data into the overall sequence, which is currently in preparation for the final publication. And I would also like to stress that we could finish the documentation of the main materials in the, after the last excavation season in 2014. So there was the chance to go into the depot and finish the documentation. But for sure, there are still many detailed questions and follow-up analysis we would like to do in the future. So the site and its landscape. Yes, this is a reconstruction, a virtual reconstruction of the presumably prehistoric landscape with the site founded within this alluvial plain. It's a quite fruitful plain with lots of freshwater sources and quite close to the original coastline, the Aegean coastline. And thanks to this drilling, core drilling investigations, the service, the palynological, botanical, and zoological and charcoal analysis, we have, I think, quite a good, solid, framework for a reconstruction of the prehistoric environment. So on the left side, you see the again the location of Çukuriçi in this plain, and there is the neighboring valley, the so-called Avalia Valley, with a almost contemporaneous site. So there's another Neolithic site quite close to Çukuriçi. And here is the prehistoric coastline. I hope you can see my my mouse here. Asla, can you see my mouse on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the prehistoric coastline, and this is the modern day. This is the today's coastline. And underneath this water horizon of this laguna is the famous antique city of Ephesus. Mm-hmm. So, and on the right side again, you can see the reconstruction of this original or prehistoric coastal environment, which is quite important to understand the local traditions at Çukuriçi Höyük. Well, and again, some other geoarchaeological results here summarized. You can see on the left side a map with purple dots. So this is the modern day Selçuk. Here is Ephesus, and here is Çukuriçi Höyük, and these dots are marking different sources of clay and rocks, and many of these sources have been used and explored by the prehistoric settlers. And on the right side, you can see a reconstruction of the original or prehistoric vegetation, again based on botanical, palynological, and charcoal analysis by different experts. So some impressions from the geoarchaeological service conducted by Danilo Wolf, by Michael Brandl, also Bogdana Milic was involved, Lisa Pelošek, and some others, and they could identify the sources for different clays, for serpentinites, and other rock sources. And together with the scientific analysis of the artifacts at the site, it's clear that many of these sources have been used through the different millennia. A quick overview, you can see the site Çukuriçi Höyük, the tell, original, much bigger in size, in the different excavation trenches. And you might recognize that these are heavy cuts that are done by bulldozers for the industrial farming just a few years before we started with our excavations. So most of the today visible tell is this part, but many cultural layers are still underneath that area here, under the today's surface of the fruit trees. And on the right side, just an overview of the various settlement phases. Early Bronze Age and late Chalcolithic phases are mostly published already, including their materials and their settlement remains and the radiocarbon dates. And I will focus now in this talk on the Neolithic, from the early Neolithic to the end of the late Neolithic occupation at Çukuriçi Höyük, covering a time span between around 6,700 and 6,000 calibrated BC. So these are these 6 settlement phases, which I try to present you again in just a quick overview to give you an impression of the settlement remains. And these are the radiocarbon dated samples together with the calibration curve. They are not yet modeled with in the Bayesian framework because we have to accomplish the stratigraphical analysis first, which is the plan for this year. And I hope to get these data published quite soon. And this is a cross-section of the entire site. So these upper levels are visible today. And you can recognize in this cross-section that this is the today's surface of the farms. And most of the remains of the Neolithic are actually underneath these alluvial plain now. So this cutting of the bulldozer here of the northern part of this of the tail was for sure a tragedy on the one hand, but on the other hand, it allowed us to enter the Neolithic layers immediately when we started to excavate that area north of the tail. So let's start with the funding horizon, which is sitting directly upon the virgin soil. And I hope you can see this on your screens, and I hope you can identify the horizontal stratigraphy here somehow. This is just an impression of one of the deep trenches with some mud pissé architecture and several horizontal layers going together with these earliest Neolithic occupation at Çukuriçi Höyük. And here is a detailed plan of the architectural remains, which are composed of some rectangular kind of architecture. Here is the corner of, I would say, a building with the inner part and several floors, one above the other, including also very thin lime plastered floors, some hearth installation, ashy layers here, and again, an hearth installation, and lots of materials that can be associated with domestic activities within the building. And here you can see the remains of a post hole connected to this architecture. And you might recognize this. We could have excavated this first and earliest occupation phase only in a very small trench when we tried to reach the virgin soil and the beginning of the tail site in 2014. So this first layer, these are again some impressions. You can see on the left side these lime plastered floors, some red lumps deposited upon the floor, and here again, these are the remains of the architecture and the post hole. And quite interesting, let me just highlight that only in this first early Neolithic phase, we have ornaments made out of marine shells, so of maritime sources. These are some rings and beads, which is then changing in the later phases where other materials are dominating the ornaments. Well, and these are already presented red lumps are most probably used for pigmenting, and there is a strong indicator that they are also used for pigmenting the red plastered floors. You can see tiny remains of red plaster sitting upon the floor. We know much better preserved examples from our neighboring site in Ulucak 6. We have seen some of these famous red plastered architecture already in Özlem Çevik's presentation a couple of weeks ago. So, and this phase of Çukuriçi 13 is contemporaneous to Ulucak 6, and in that respect, also not so surprising in my view that we have similar kind of architectural remains as in Ulucak 6. And here again, some impressions from this earliest Çukuriçi 13 phase, again with red and burned remains, white plaster too, and some architecture visible here in the profile. The next phase 12, is also dated to what we understand in Western Anatolia as, I would say, as early Neolithic, dated roughly between 6,600 and 6,500 calibrated BC. So these layers of phase 12 were the most tricky part in the excavations of the Neolithic sequence. I'm talking about these two squares here, both about 5 to 5 meters large. They are designed as complex 20 and complex 23 this is the eastern part, complex 23. And they are stratigraphically related with each other and are contemporaneous. What I show you now is mostly unpublished material that we are still, stratigraphically analyze in the details. But I nevertheless wanted to present it to you to give you an impression of what is going on in these early Neolithic phases. Because there are some interesting features, and this eastern part is composed of a deep depression running north to south. And this depression is covered all over in several layers of heavy white lime. All these whitish structures you see here are covering off a depression, and also with renewals and reparations. And to be careful for sure in our interpretation, but we had a very strong impression that this can be interpreted as a kind of a ditch running from north to south, covered entirely with lime and slices of lime, and then later filled up totally with different sediments, animal bones, stones, and then leveled. You can see here a photo of this of one of these deep trenches, and here some of the remains of the lime plastered depression, and the whole area was filled up. This, I would say, ditch was filled up and then covered with domestic structures. Some of them are circular or semicircular, integrating heavy and large stones, as well as kind of hut structures with pisse walls, some pyrotechnical installations inside, with materials that can be associated with clear domestic activities. So first there was this lime plastered area, which was then leveled and then covered with domestic features. And on the other side, so I have presented you the eastern part and the western part of this phase 12 is continuing with this with this lime plastered areas with several large pits, and again later remains of circular or semicircular structures, and lots of using horizons and floors. I'm sorry. Lots of using horizons and floors that can be associated with these very interesting features, as well as ashy layers and one floor above the other. So these were the remains of the phases 13 and 12. Again, an insight into the deep trench. Here you can see these heavy lime plastered areas, parts of the collapsed architecture, and in the background you might identify this very small trench here. This was the deep trench where we had to try to reach the virgin soil at one point, at least in 2014, where we were under heavy time pressure to at least accomplish this part. And down there is the phase 13 I have shown you before. So this is the overview. On the eastern part, you see the complex 23. On the western part, the complex 20. And this all massive accumulation of different features, the ditch, some domestic features, some hearse installations, lots of floors are covering this earliest phase above the virgin soil. And when it comes to the question of how these pioneers can be connected to the question of the Neolithization, well, I have to bring somehow my idea of maritime pioneers, or pioneers using maritime routes, again, a reconstruction of the coastline in prehistoric times. And at least it's clear that the Çukuriçi settlers had a lot of skills related with maritime activities, also in the later periods. And this is all embedded in a huge package of nautical knowledge, including, knowledge about seafaring skills, winds and currents, the seasonality of these winds and currents, landing options, and freshwater sources. And I will show you a bit later some clear indicators that the Çukuriçi settlers traveled over the sea from time to time. And for sure, we don't have any evidence of how these Çukuriçi people traveled. We nevertheless did a hypothetical suggestion of light wooden boats known from ethnographical examples. Anyhow, so even if you don't follow or if you don't like to follow the idea of a migration to the Aegean coast, it's clear that the first settlers at Çukuriçi came from somewhere and brought a lot of knowledge already with them. And I think this is important to point out that also the first pioneers there brought already a full Neolithic lifestyle and all economic aspects of a Neolithic life with them. And I have discussed this in a paper some years ago. I think it's important to understand the fundamentals of these settlers, that they brought their knowledge with them, but nevertheless started to shape their own local identities, and they're starting also new traditions based on this, in my view, set of memories they had already with them. And these are the components of the Neolithization. I will not explain in details for sure, but when you look just at the column of these pioneers of Ulucak 6 and Çukuriçi 13, lots of these components of the Neolithic way of life are already embedded in these very early settlement phases for the Western Anatolian coast, including some house-based communities. If we can talk already about village life, I think this is still an open question we can discuss later, but we have all elements of architecture and house-based societies already established there, with painted plaster, painted floors, plastered floors, the entire package of domestic animals, cultivated plants, and there were also fishes and shellfishes. They have already from the beginning at Çukuriçi and also in Ulucak, as far as I know, the entire material culture related with a Neolithic way of life. So this is just symbolizing this idea in a quick summary. It's clear that wherever they came from, either from near or far, these Çukuriçi, this is here the jumping fish, are for sure not reaching or coming into an empty bowl. So, and thanks to Cila Cilingerolo's work, for example, at Karaburun, it's clear that there was a Mesolithic or pre-Neolithic community, and also at many other places in the Greek Aegean. There is already since decades known a strong evidence for a Mesolithic mobile population with all the knowledge, not only on fishing and seafaring, the obsidian sources, and for sure many other sources, but they have already an established network in the Aegean. And these Çukuriçi settlers brought their knowledge and practices of a Neolithic way of life, including technologies, ideas, strategies, house societies, and the full package of farming and herding with them. And this led me to this model that is also published years ago of a maritime route for these pioneers. For sure, we cannot pinpoint the concrete origin, but in our ideas, we have published the idea that they sailed along, came along the Turkish coastline, along the coastline to the central Aegean coast, and again brought their knowledge with them. And you see in this map also these sources of Syros. I will show that in a couple of minutes, and the famous obsidian sources in Milos and Yali, and some of the sites that I would understand as pioneers as well, like famous Knossos, Ganjti Cave, Paliambela, Ulucak for sure, Barcin. Barcin has also been presented in this series already. So, and there are for sure many routes within this Neolithic dispersal. And some of these topics have been discussed in more details in one of the volumes that I could have added together with Maxime Bramy. And this is a map of our introduction and of the farming frontier of his paper. So let's continue with the late Neolithic settlement. So there is a hiatus less, without a break, continuous settlement, settling of the site, and we will continue immediately now with the phase 10, dating roughly between 6,400 and 6,300 calibrated BC, and you can see that we have a kind of change in the architecture and in the use of space. From now on onwards, we can talk about the Neolithic village, in my view, with several houses, with solid architecture. You can see them, the reconstruction of the houses and open spaces between these houses that are somehow oriented to each other. And these open spaces, this is a kind of a courtyard here, and this is an open activity zone. I will show you some details soon. And these areas appears to be accessible from all sides. So I think we are not going too far when we interpret them as kind of communal areas used by several of these house communities here, perhaps together. So, and this is one of the details. This is this activity zone between the houses in phase 10, with lots of remains for cooking, food processing, hearth installations. You can see several hearth installations, pyrotechnical features with lots of renewals and reparations, a stone platform, some other platforms and cooking facilities, grinding stones, lots of remains of animal bones, also with butchery remarks. So it's clear that that this area was used for cooking and food processing, and also some bone implements here. Here you can see this stone platform used for some kind of working in this food processing procedure, and even also some ornaments like this turquoise beads studied by Emma Beisal. And to mention this particular special building, it's a normal house with this very normal kind of standardized stone socle architecture with pissé walls and heavy posts. You can see here remains of the post holes in some of the parts of the walls, most likely made of heavy and large oaks, following the results of our wood experts. And interestingly, just only in this house, within this house, we see remains of, we could recover remains of many activity zones and activity areas, and again remains of even of a workshop. Here again, an overview of the structure. Here you can maybe identify the architecture again, the solid architecture in the inner part, on the eastern part, this kind of workshop, and on the western part there should be, I know there's a photo again with grinding stones, pounders, long blades, lots of implements, tools used for different kind of works. And on the western part, inside the building, you recognize several depositions. And this was quite interesting because these depositions are in some aspects for Çukuriçi some kind of special. There are bone tools, we have seen this before, and ceramic vessels in situ deposited here, but also a pile of slingshots was deposited inside the building. You might remember the discussion we had after Özlem Çevik's talk, if there are weapons available in the late Neolithic communities, and there are these slingshot depots. I think there are also some in Ulucak 5, I guess, and there are also slingshot depots recovered at Çukuriçi, one inside this complex 10 building and another one outside. And these slingshots could have been used. Here's some impressions from the excavations. They could have been used as weapons, either for sure for hunting, or even for herding by means of keeping the flock together, or also for sure for violent conflicts between humans. And two other quite interesting depositions are related with lithic tools. On the left side, you see this, I would say, even somehow famous obsidian cache. I will come to that obsidian cache later again, and some toolkit also deposited inside this complex 10 building. So this is the building in the virtual reconstruction here. So we have these open air activity zones, and this is continuing also in the next following phase 9. We're still in the late Neolithic, and I'll give you just a quick overview here. I don't want to bother you with too many details, but again, we have this open area with pits and remains of waste, midden, and several productions, as well as houses. Again, here a building, a rectangular building, and an open area used again for food processing, with lots of hearths, installations, ovens, with several renewals and reparations. And this is a part of one of these large buildings with this massive stone circle architecture. Let me just highlight these rounded corners, which seems to be also somehow typical for this late Neolithic architecture at Çukuriçi, following the results of our architect. And interestingly, this building and all the other buildings are characterized by very clean floors. So the floors are super cleaned, and all the materials coming from inside the buildings that you can see here during the excavation are just an artificial and intentional infill after giving up of this house. And within this infill, there was a lot of midden and also some intentional deposition, like this wonderful necklace of green and greenish and red beads again studied by the expert Emma Baysal. So, and associated and contemporaneous to this solid house architecture, I would like to stress again the evidence for this open air zones, again with food processing. You can recognize the platforms built with lime and clay, and lots of renewals of the hearth. And again, here's a working platform made of a massive accumulation of stones, covered then with clay to a platform. And here's some detailed mappings of these massive platforms and hearth installations with grinding stones, lots of animal bones and food remains under study by Alfred Gallig and Ursula Tannheiser. Here in a detailed picture of one of these grinding stones at the site. And last but not least, this is the final occupation phase in the Neolithic, the Çukuriçi phase 8, somehow still continuing the already established standard system at the site with rectangular buildings. You can identify this huge building here, replacing the former huge building standing at the same place here before, and some other architectural features here, again with stone circle architecture, open spaces, this kind of courtyards with all these pits we could identify also in the former late Neolithic settlement phases. So this is the result of a paper, of a joint paper together with Maxime Bramy and Felix Ostmann. I just want to stress this one detail that during the entire late Neolithic occupation, there was also the practice of replacement of buildings one above the other. We know this practice for sure from central Anatolia and other regions in the Near East, and have seen many of these examples in this lecture series before. But it's quite interesting that the Çukuriçi settlers replaced this one building one above the other on this particular place. So there is a commitment by the settlers to this place. Although it was quite an unstable level here, which might be related with the ditch I have presented you before, which makes the entire area here quite unstable for this massive architecture. And this is most likely one of the reasons why this building collapsed so frequently and had to be rebuilt. So let me embed the entire story now in the late Neolithic Western Anatolian world. You can see here a mapping of all the excavated, or most of the excavated and dated sites in Western Anatolia and East Aegean, particular in that area of the central Aegean coast of Anatolia, we can see lots of similarities in the material culture of these sites. There should be another view now. Yeah, you can see the same perspective now from the sea to the coast with these sites of Egekübre, Yeşilova, Ulucak, Dedecik, Çukuriçi, and the neighboring Avalya Höyük and Ayogala on the island. So we think of, in my view, these sites, these villages show strong connections to each other. So there is an established exchange system during the entire late Neolithic phase. We can see this in the shared practice of material culture, of pottery, of artifacts, of technologies, etc. But we can also recognize lots of differences in the architectural technique, which is an interesting, maybe detail aspect we could discuss later. Some words about the subsistence strategies and the fisher women and farmers. I have stressed the point that the Çukuriçi settlers were fisher women from the beginning onwards, and thanks to Alfred Gallig's detailed studies and his expertise in analyzing fish bones, we know now that the Neolithic Çukuriçi settlers practiced fishing in many aspects, close to the shore as well as offshore fishing in deep blue sea with different techniques and with a high expertise in hunting different species at different seasons. We can reconstruct some kind of net fishing as well as fishing with hooks. This is an example from Çukuriçi, but I also brought this summary or this plate of Katrin Pelle's book showing different hooks found at different places, and a tuna fillet excavated directly in one of the houses at Çukuriçi in concrete in complex 3 house in phase 10, coming directly from an inner part of the house. So fishing played an important role in the subsistence from the beginning. On the left side, you see the statistical summary by Alfred Gallig. So the gray scales here are the domesticates, and the others here are the fishes, and you can read the details here. So we have for sure some shifts during the Neolithic sequence. So at the bottom is the oldest phase 13, and up there is the youngest Neolithic phase 8. The same is here with the quantifications of the domesticates. There are some changes between the pioneering phase and the late Neolithic phase, but overall, I think it's important to highlight the fact that from the beginning onwards, we have the 4-deer husbandry of sheep, goat, cattle, and the domestic pig evident at the site. And this is an important indicator for us too, that the Çukuriçi settlers did not came via terrestrial routes from inland Anatolia, where the domestic pig is known later, much later. Yes, the subsistence strategy when it comes to farming. Well, the crops and the seeds were quite bad preserved at Çukuriçi, although we did the flotation of many sediments and almost all cultural layers we have excavated. But at least our botanists could detect, again from the pioneer phase onwards, barley and emmer wheat. We could not identify any phytoliths in the remains, which leads our botanical expert to the conclusion that the main processing of the crops took place outside the area we have excavated, perhaps outside the village and next to the fields. So this is at the moment a model for interpretation. And I'll come to my final chapter about resources and networks, and for sure I have to start with this wonderful obsidian cache. And when we talk about the lithics, let me say a few words. The lithic assemblages of Çukuriçi stands in some contrast to other contemporaneous sites in the region. So here we can see some differences, and these are the results of Bogdana Milic. She is in the audience, so, and I'm sure she's happy to ask detailed questions later. But these results, these main results, have been published already. I just want to summarize it quickly for you. So we see a different picture when it comes to the use of raw materials, and especially when it comes to the use of obsidian. Obsidian is an exotic material when we take the distance to the sources into account here, in both directions, to the Aegean as well as to Central Anatolia. And usually obsidian is present at the other sides to an amount between 20 and 25% in the region. But at Çukuriçi, we see already from the beginning, in the founding phase, the amount of 33%, which is gradually rising then, which is gradually rising up to a percentage of 86 until the end of the Neolithic sequence in the late Neolithic period, around 6000 calibrated BC. And it's important to note also that this shift of raw materials is mirrored also in the changes of the technology in the production of the chipped stones, which is mainly referring to the production of regular blades with the use of pressure technology, which is dominant then immediately after the earliest occupation level. Yes, and the highlights, one highlight of the chipped stones comes with the discovery of the cache of long obsidian blades, which we excavated within a house context. I have shown you the house and the contextual features before. They were found together, and originally, most likely wrapped in a kind of an organic container or a leather bag or something like this. So you can see each other. You can see us here during the excavations. So yeah, I can say this was one of our greatest day at the site when we had the chance to excavate this wonderful cache together. Thanks Bogdana for this. Yes, and our closest comparisons for this cache are reaching back to the PPN contexts, where caches of long blades are well known. They're including either pressure or bidirectional or naviform blades, which were deposited together in a number of examples across Southwest Asia and the Levant. And just for illustration here, here are some well-known PPNB examples from Southern and Northern Levant and Cyprus. So, and to show you another highlight, which is perhaps not so well known yet, there is a new source of jadeite identified a couple of years ago on the island of Syros, which is here, marked by this red star, identified by the colleagues Patrick Herr and Lasse Sørensen. And we identified jadeite sources, or the use of jadeite in the production of stone axes at Çukuriçi in the late Neolithic phases at Çukuriçi Höyük. And thanks to the analysis of the experts, it is most likely that these jadeite axes at Çukuriçi are produced with jadeite coming from this source of Syros. And this is one of the better preserved examples analyzed and most likely produced from this source. So altogether, this entire stone procurement and exchange analytical studies, I would like to mention Michael Brandl here and Christoph Schwall, and also many others who were involved in the study. So it's quite clear that the Çukuriçi settlers used local rock sources. So these are the cherts in the direct vicinity, the chert sources, and regional sources, as well as far away exotic rock types from the earliest phase at the Çukuriçi site onwards during the entire prehistoric sequence, also including the early Bronze Age levels. And in many of these source procurement strategies, maritime traveling is involved. So, and to come to an end, I would like to show you some kind of a typical assemblage of the late Neolithic phases, which are showing many similarities to the other sites in the region I have presented and I've mentioned before. I would say this is a kind of a typical cultural assemblage, material culture assemblage here, which I will not discuss in details, but just to give you an overview. And the same is true for the imagery. Well, Çukuriçi is not a very arty place, I have to admit. So these are all the figurines and figurative art I can present you. Some small stone amulets, some zoomorphic figurine, or at least a part of it, and some kind of a stamp-like figure. But these figurative objects can also be embedded in the wider context of the Aegean, Anatolian imagery in the late Neolithic period. So, and let me say at the end that we had a quite fantastic time at Çukuriçi. I had the chance to work with fantastic students young scholars, senior experts, and we all hope to come back at one point in the future to finish what we have started there and could not accomplish in all aspects. The research was funded by the European Research Council, the Austrian Academy of Sciences, and the Austrian Science Fund, to mention the most important one. And let me also highlight that that we have installed a repository with the publishing house of the Academy of Sciences, where all publications and books related with our work are free, accessible, and are stored at this open access repository. So please visit this repository and use the publications. There are currently about 90 papers and 3 books. And we plan to, for sure, upload also the next upcoming publications. And this brings me to the end to say again, thank you to Mehriban and Güneş for inviting me. And again, it's my honor to dedicate this lecture to Offa Bayosef, one of the greatest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. So anybody who wants to ask questions? Anybody?
Also, there are 2 hands raised. Can you see them?
See. Which one? Where?
Mary and Trevor.
I couldn't see this. Okay.
Ah.
Okay, I see.
So Barbara, thank you for a fascinating talk. I've always been very interested in the Neolithic of the Aegean and how people are getting around and the networks, etc. And it was really a great talk. Thank you. I'm curious. I'm not sure if I quite understood, but where is the bulk of the obsidian coming from in the different periods? Is it principally from the islands, or how much would it be coming from Central Anatolia?
Well, most of the material is coming from the Aegean island of Milos. So it's this well-known Melian obsidian, and just smaller amounts are coming from the Cappadocian sources. But maybe Bogdana, do you want to give more details to the amounts?
Hello. Hi. So yeah, as Barbara said, like most of the things are coming from Milos, and also just as a side note, it was very difficult to kind of sample everything and analyze. So in a bulk of things that we kind of investigated in debris analysis by neutron activation analysis and portable XRF, it seems like that most of the 95% is actually coming from Milos. And another interesting fact is also that in the very beginning of the settlements, it's exclusively Milos. So in the oldest or earliest phases, 13 and 12, and then slowly when the late Neolithic starts, then there is expansion of networks, as we discussed in a couple of papers, when the Cappadocian sources come in as well. But it's really small percentage. And I guess that it might become even bigger if we analyzed more, but also in just microscopical representation, we kind of first did random sampling and analysis, and then later just focused on this transparent with different bandings obsidian, and those were clearly Cappadocian, but even macroscopical observation shows that it's like a tiny sample.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Trevor Watkins, please.
Yeah, I was really going to raise the same point as Mary, but I thank you very much indeed, Barbara, for taking us to the site and showing us so much. What I was so really impressed by was that you've got so many species of fish. I know you can't quantify how much fish they were eating relative to how much sheep meat they were eating. You can't compare these things, obviously, but the range of species is so impressive, yeah. And then when you add to that particularly once they become fully established and cease to be a pioneer but are an established community, the vast amount of obsidian that's coming from across the Aegean from Milos, yeah, they are a seafaring people, yeah. And if I could just make a question out of that, do we have any parallels for such settlements around the corner into the Mediterranean and further east, yeah, which are so strong in seafaring or in the use of fish? I can't think of any.
Thank you, Trevor. Well, first of all, I think this is really an important aspect. The whole fishing practice and the knowledge and the skills of practicing different techniques in fishing from the pioneer phase onwards gives us the right context to understand the Çukuriçi settlers and their traditions. And in my view, yes, I think we can compare this aspect of maritime, the importance of maritime connections with other sites in the Aegean, like for example with the Franchti cave, where fishing played a crucial role, not only for the subsistence, but also for the ornaments. For example, the production of ornaments of shells was highlighted by Catherine Perles in a paper, and also for sure not only during the Neolithic phase, but also in the former Mesolithic and even Paleolithic phases. So I think there are a couple of other examples too. When it comes to the southern Anatolian coastal zone, I'm afraid I'm not aware of any sites giving us comparable data at the moment, but for sure Cyprus should be taken into account here.
Yeah. Okay, please, Yanamlevski.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you for your lecture. I have a small question on small finds. You show two figurines, anthropomorphic figurines, or maybe pendants. And my question is, which material they are made, and if you have a concrete dating for them, either from an iconographic or from the iconographic motifs or from the context where they were found.
Thank you, Janja, and hi, nice to see you again. Yes, these two pendants are both made of different stones. The better preserved one is coming from, can be dated due to the context where we've recovered it. It's about 6,500 calibrated BC. And the other one is coming from a disturbed layer. That's why it's hard to date it via the context. But I would not be surprised to date it to somehow the same time range, and also for sure a bit later. It could also be it could also appear later in the late Neolithic phases. But I can send you the paper because we have published both of them. And if I remember right, the well contextualized pendant is made of a quite hard amphibolite-like stone. I think we have a clear geological definition of the material. So it's really a hard stone that is quite also not easy to work and to drill.
Thank you.
Please, Vasuf.
Hello, Barbara. Nice to see you. And thank you very much for the really inspiring talk. I'm not a Neolithic person, so maybe my question will be, off the topic. I just got curious with this blue turquoise. You said turquoise bead that you have here. I don't know if Emma is here, but Is there a source of this? Because you also highlighted the Eastern Mediterranean connections. I wondered if it could be something like a picrolite from Cyprus, or if you have some other connections with Cyprus. Just I just thought I saw it. Thank you.
It's so nice to see you again, Vasif, but you're asking such difficult questions.
Maybe Emma
yes, I just look around if Emma is around to help me out here, because as far as I know, Emma, if you're around, please raise your voice. Okay, as far as I know, this is not a real turquoise. Yeah. This is one of the so-called fake blue beads that Emma and some other colleagues are investigating at the Koch lab. And I think this one I've presented to you is also part of this fake blue bead thing. So it's not a real turquoise, to be honest. Okay. It just looks like. And the question, if we have relations to Cyprus, well, one indirect relation, in my view, is still the idea of the practice of hoarding these long blades. This long blade caching is a practice that we don't know from Western Anatolia yet, but that we know quite well from Cyprus. So in this indirect evidence, we have some connections, and for sure the fishing and maritime traveling is a connection too. But this is all, more indirect than on a meta level and not a direct connection when it comes to sources.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just because of the picrolite sources in Cyprus, my thought. Thank you.
Yeah, good idea, Vasif.
Thank you.
Please, Mary.
I'm curious also about the ceramics. Another area I don't work on. I know that some of the earliest communities, Neolithic communities on the Peloponnese in Greece, there'd always been a question, did they possess ceramic by the time they, ceramic technology, vessel technology by the time they arrived? And of course, some of that may be a sampling problem because these earliest components are so rare. But it does seem generally that by the time you have the Neolithic colonists in Greece, at least Aegean Greece, that they have ceramics. This community that you've investigated, at the point that it starts, is there already a very well established ceramic vessel technology?
Thank you for asking this question. I totally forgot to mention pottery at all. To answer it quickly, no. Actually, the first phase, this phase 13, is a level without pottery production by means of ceramic vessel production, which can be compared with Ulucak 6, where we are also lacking vessel production. But for sure, they're able and they were skilled in working with pyrotechnical features and with lime and with clay. So it's not a topic that they were not able to do this, but obviously there was no need to produce ceramic vessels, at least in this earliest phase we could have excavate. Interestingly, from the next level onward, from 6,600 calibrated BC onwards, we have a full established pottery production, which is not changing very much during the entire Neolithic sequence.
Çiler?
Thank you, Barbara. Fascinating as always. I just wanted to make a note about the seafarer component of your interpretation. I think it's very important to distinguish between the modes of procurement of all these Aegean raw materials. The big question for me is how to distinguish between direct procurement from the sources of Çukuriçi farmer herders versus some middlemen who were sort of responsible and organizing, and were kind of also specialized in this very challenging conditions of Aegean seafaring. About the fishing evidence, I agree. I mean, it's the species diversity is very great, but of course, most of them live in inshore areas. Even the tuna fish, we know that they approach to the shore because they're following the smaller fish. And I'm sure Çukuriçi community had a very good understanding and know-how of the seafaring technology, and they may have fished offshore, of course. But is this enough to suggest that they also went all the way down to Milos to procure the obsidian by themselves? Or can we consider other possibilities? And this would be the most exciting sort of question that I would like to have. What do you think? What does the evidence suggest, and what do you think about this different mechanisms that may have played a role in the Aegean network?
Thank you, Chiler. As you know, we're discussing these topics since a while, and it's not so easy to tackle and to differentiate the different modes. You're totally right. I totally agree that we should differentiate here. And seafaring is not the same, and it's different if you're, fishing along the coast or if you are traveling over the deep blue sea to different sources. Well, before I would like to hand over to Bogdana to give us her ideas about the obsidian, I would like to stress one point. At least as far as we know, most of the islands, or all of the islands we know, have not an established, there is no settled community on the islands in the 7th millennium. So this means the islands were just visited from time to time, but different mobile communities. And for sure, there are these kind of sources, and perhaps many, many more that we don't know yet anymore. But the sources on the islands were procured already in the, in the epiphal time and during the entire Mesolithic. So this means there was a network, and there was a community of mobile groups in the Aegean Sea, traveling around and being aware and having all this knowledge. So for sure, we could think of indirect exchange systems here at one point, but I'm not so convinced that this Mesolithic, perhaps let me say this, Mesolithic travelers are the traders too. So I think this is, in my understanding, also a concept that might not work. And one of the reasons is the amount of obsidian on the one hand, and its continuous use during the entire settlement history on the other hand, which again is not a strong evidence. This is not a hard fact, but it could be an indicator that at least some of the Çukuriçi people from time to time traveled somehow in the sea. Bogdana, would you like to add something about the state of obsidian, how it came to the site, because this is your result?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. I mean, we all, I think, love this question, and especially just to carry on what was Barbara saying about the amounts. I mean, this is one of the really strong factors to look at, and this continuity in procurement, which is probably solely not enough to demonstrate a lot, but when combined with different stages of chaîne opératoire that are present on the site, and especially contrasting the other evidences from contemporaneous sites, it's giving us more hints. And maybe here that there are kind of two parts of the stories that can facilitate our interpretation about this potential direct procurement. And I think that we were even more careful than other people who were writing and citing Çukuriçi, who would even go for the theory about Çukuriçi being a central place and so on. in the redistribution networks. I think the first thing is to look at Western Anatolia and the Aegean, the Greek mainland in particular, in terms of obsidian presence and production. And if we follow, for example, Catherine Perlet's idea about middlemen and itinerant nappers, we have to be aware of the fact that in Greece, every time we have obsidian that comes as ready-made products, more or less every time, at least for the main sites, and that locally pressure technique was not practiced. So then it's not just about procuring of obsidian, but itinerant nappers being also specialized in particular technique. And in Western Anatolia, on the other hand, we have practically on every site, we have local production of pressure. And this is something to be directly contrasted. And in the second scenario, we have Çukuriçi with these amazing amounts. When we have like 85% of obsidian, other sites have up to 15 or 20. And then we might not have chunks because likely they're not very suitable to be brought to the site, but we have everything else that would attest to a local production. And not just only, but when we go more into details about pressure technique, one should think about skill and knowledge that people should or have in mind when preparing a core, for instance. So if you want to do your production yourself, you also need to know how to prepare things and also how to practically go to the source, procure, and not just to bring chunks and then waste the trip and everything else. So in these terms, we can say that definitely a part of things can be very easily interpreted as direct procurement. But of course, I mean, in more or less from time to time, it might be also that Çukuriçi was in this favorable location and was also receiving obsidian from other groups more easily or had different connections. So it might not be that they always went to the source and were taking them themselves, but also being integrated in networks to receive it easier, plus direct procurement. So I don't know if this answers the question.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara and Bogdana. Maybe we can think more of a hybrid organization where pre-Neolithic people were involved with their high sort of know-how about the seafaring and sea routes and currents and winds, etc. Whereas technologically, maybe your nappers were consistent and they wanted to, sort of transcend the Mesolithic mode of lithic production and sort of, wanted to produce this pressure technique from the beginning onwards. With the beginning, we have only 30% and it goes up to 80%. Maybe through time, we can suggest that there is more evidence for direct procurement versus in the very beginning, maybe they were still learning how to reach to the island and they received the material in chunks and they were also using quartz, which also sort of suggests that they were, they weren't really aware of the more quality material in the very beginning and then they gave up quartz at some point because they had more access to obsidian. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think initially in the publication, we were also in 2015 talking about in the first stage, they were in the phase of adaptation where they were looking for sources in the direct surrounding, but also getting introduced to obsidian via other people who were traveling and having more experience with knowing the Aegean. So I think that, right, Barbara, that was the
Yes. We have published this idea a couple of years ago, but for sure not in this hybrid kind of model that we could for sure develop for the future. And at least you should have to, keep in mind all these groups that never came back, when they traveled to or tried to reach Milos or Syros and did not find their ways home. Okay.
Thank you so much. Greetings to both of you.
Okay, please.
Oh, sorry. Hello. So you said please for me, right?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Okay, Rana, go on.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question. Thank you very much for the talk. It was really nice to hear it. And I actually had a question regarding, I know there were some lipid residues that were analyzed. I'm curious about the results of them, and also whether isotope analyses have been carried out on human, I guess you don't have human actually, but on animal bones. These are some questions I'm interested in. And also, I could also mention about the blue beads because they were done by a student of mine, the analyses for the blue beads, at least the ones from Bargen, which show the same. They are heat treated for the color to become sort of the blue. And we're still trying to work out, in fact, the exact procedure. We've done experimental studies on trying to make the beads blue, but they are basically what we think are fossil bone that has been sort of put into a slurry, probably with manganese, and then heated to achieve the blue color. That's what we at least discovered with our experiments, but there's still, it's still very fragile, and it doesn't really fit the hardness that we see with the materials. So I wanted to add that too for Vasif's question. So thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent, Rana. Thank you very much for adding this information. I was just aware that our geologists really were very clear in their definition that this is not a precious stone material, but this is something else. And then Emma did the analysis with you together. And I'm glad to hear that this is a super fancy technology, obviously, to produce this fake blue, these blue beads. Wow,
yeah, yeah.
That's super interesting. About your question, well, actually, no, we did not have tried so far any isotopes with the animal bone samples, but this is something we wanted to do in the future as soon as we have access to the materials again. And we tried some ADNA with the early domestic examples with the Dublin lab, but this was unfortunately not successful due to the bad preservation. So isotopes not yet, but are planned for the future. Well, the lipid analysis of the ceramics was a kind of frustrating story for us. We were not so lucky as you were with your wonderful expert in your project. So the results, well, are not so convincing, to be honest. But we took further samples and wanted to give it another try.
Okay, well, that thank you. I'm just curious because I know they were analyzed. I just was wondering. Thank you.
Yeah.
Please.
You're muted.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to warm congratulate Barbara and her team for such a hard work and efficient work, and for this nice presentation that shows the progress for the final, towards the final publication. I was impressed by many things you have presented us, but particularly by the space management. We have seen in the earlier phases, in the phases of the early Neolithic, but also in the late Neolithic, a continuation, renovation of houses, etc. But also in the meantime, the change of use in some areas. For example, you have presented us this ditch, what you have called ditch, which was filled for being used later for both for the erection of a house and for communal installations in this area. And also later in this fragile area, you have shown us that they have built in 3 different phases of a house with a stone foundation. My question is, okay, the continuation may indicate properties, inheritance, etc. I'm thinking that this entire area is a seismic area, and I'm wondering whether you have recognized in the mud brick buildings of the early Neolithic, or also in the stone belt houses of the later part of the Neolithic, signs of earthquakes. I'm asking this because in my experience in the East Aegean is that people were a bit masochistic in terms that they, despite of earthquakes and destructions, etc., they were coming back and they were building houses at the same position. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rania, for stressing the point. Yeah. Well, maybe you know, the Aegean coastal people did not change so much during the Neolithic when it comes to the replacement of houses in a seismic area. And yes, you're right, this is a heavily seismic area. We were lucky, we had an architect, an architectural expert helping us to document the details of the architecture and in particular the details of this built environment and the houses and the destruction levels. Yeah, so this is what I can, you know, just summarize quickly here. We have some destruction of collapsed walls, but according to the architect, the kind of destruction orientation within the stone walls is not indicating heavy earthquakes. So to sum it up very, you know, very roughly, a quite detailed study by the architects. But this does not exclude the opportunity that earthquake destruction happened from time to time, generally speaking, because you know we know even in the last 20 years these kind of earthquakes are happening all the time. But we are, you know, according to the data we have excavated, we think that this quite unstable ground is related at Çukuriçi also with the layers underneath. And when we reach these lower layers, we recognize this depression, and this depression is exactly running underneath these houses that are always showing us these collapsing walls. So I think there is a former history of the early Neolithic somehow being, somehow resulting into the collapsing architecture in the late Neolithic times. So in that aspect, I would like to take your point and talk about an Aegean continuity in rebuilding at crazy places. Thank you, Rania.
Thank you, Tom.
Please, Daniela.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Barbara, for your talk and also for your nice words about Ofra. I would like to get back to the maritime connections and the maritime activities. I'm a very strong advocate of maritime activities well before the occupation of Çukuriçi. I think I mean, I know, we all know for sure that, and I'm sure all of you know it just as I do, that Cyprus was occupied before, and that Australia was occupied much, much earlier than that. So there's no question about it. And well, I think I want to just relate to what Chiler said, that we don't know whether raw materials were procured directly or indirectly. And just to remind that also on land, we usually cannot tell for sure whether they were procured directly or indirectly. That's one of the big mysteries of how things from far away reached a certain point. And just because, you know, I've been working on those shells forever, coming from the Red Sea, from the Mediterranean, from the Nile River, etc., we never know how they got there. That I think it will remain a mystery forever. We can make some guided suppositions, you know, based on what we find along the way, the distribution of materials, but that's about it. No one's going to tell us. So, as Ofer used to say, unfortunately, we cannot interview those people. So that's just some of my thoughts following your wonderful lecture. And one other question, comment about that blue-green bead. Maybe it is the imitation blue beads. I don't know. Emma will find out for us, I'm sure. But about picrolite, I have been looking for picrolite outside of Cyprus for many years now, and so far I haven't found any. If anyone knows about picrolite outside of Cyprus, please share it with me. I'm very curious. And these are my comments, actually. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniela.